The modern drive to pursue happiness is so interwoven into the fabric of Western thought that it is enshrined into the American Declaration of Independence. We are constantly reminded of the notion that our goal in life is to pursue happiness relentlessly. We hear the seductive calls of thrilling experiences, of relationships pulsating with excitement and heated romance, of vocations that evoke such ardor that work becomes indistinguishable from play, of alluring material possessions and captivating getaways, all resounding fervently from the depths of social media, from our movies, from our songs, our advertising, and even from the wise counsel of our elders. This resonant clarion call suggests that our lives should be calibrated around the attainment of happiness, and that when we reach a crossroads, the correct way to frame the problem is to ask ourselves, which path would make me more happy? However, in this essay, I will delve into the reasons why I believe that our modern preoccupation with happiness is misplaced. It is a flawed model for living in the world, and paradoxically sets us up to fail at delivering the very thing we so passionately seek. Before proceeding any further, I would like to make it unequivocally clear what I am not saying. I am not suggesting that being unhappy is acceptable. On the contrary, unhappiness may be an indicator, although not always, that something is amiss in our lives. However, the consideration of happiness should not serve as the primary vector for determining our next course of action. There are other, better ways of thinking of the problem of unhappiness, as I'll explain later. Let us do a thought experiment to illustrate the mistake of putting the pursuit of happiness on our societal pedestal. Let's assume that we accept that the highest good we can attain, or that society collectively can attain, is the maximized happiness of all people. There are those who claim that the emotion of happiness is entirely a matter of neurobiology. Given the right set of neurotransmitters, with neurons firing in the right sequence, a state of happiness can be induced into the conscious experience of a mind. Drugs that induce euphoria, like cocaine, for example, demonstrate that indeed happiness can be achieved with pharmacology, transient though it might be, and often at some noticeable cost. But if the emotion of happiness is a matter for neurobiology, then it stands to reason we just need to develop better drugs. Perhaps in the future, we'll not just have vastly superior drugs, but we'll also be able to induce a state of bliss with neural implants as well. The happy mind, from this perspective, is an engineering problem. Let us then imagine a future, a few hundred years from now, when this engineering problem has been solved. Imagine that we've created a highly advanced device that induces great bliss and happiness in the minds of its users. The device is extremely safe, and not only produces happiness, but also a sense of profound peace and connection to the conscious experience of its users. If happiness is all that matters, if it is the ultimate goal that we should be striving towards, then the invention of this device would be the pinnacle achievement of mankind. We will have reached the end of the road. The only other things we would have to invent is systems that allowed humans to safely wear the devices all the time. Perhaps we'd create autonomous robots to grow our food, maintain our infrastructure, and otherwise run our economies. The robots would even watch the skies for us, protecting us from those rare meteors that might hit the planet, also that we can safely retreat into the life of endless bliss and withdraw from the world. Indeed, if happiness is the be-all end-all imperative of a human life, it is puzzling that all of humankind has not declared its intention to solve the problem of happiness by inventing such a device. And why even stop there? If happiness can be induced into the human brain with a device, then why not just put the human brain into a vat and crank the device up to a 10? That way, the vat can be placed in bunkers deep underground to protect them from any chance of harm. We would only need faithful robots to maintain them and to maintain an energy source. The human brain, in its vat, could be kept alive for centuries in order to maximize the amount of happiness it experiences. Such a future, while it might make logical sense, has the quality of being absurd. There is a natural instinct to argue against such an outcome. One might argue that human connection and having a society are also important. But the counter-argument to this is that if the human conscious experience is maximally happy and blissful, nothing else is actually needed. Why have any of those things if the brain is already in a state of maximal bliss? Career, family, society, music, literature. None of it would matter if the mind was effortlessly and maximally happy at all times. The instinct to argue against such a future is a hint that we intuitively know that there is something not quite right about the wisdom of prioritizing happiness above all other things. Let me give some voice to this instinctive sense. The first point to make is a highly empirical and scientific one. If we believe that the human mind evolved, as did everything else about us, then the sensation we call happiness must also have evolved to serve a purpose. We can argue, in fact, that all emotions serve some purpose that is aimed at pushing our genes forward to the next generation. Even anger and fury can be useful to the organism because it pushes the organism to defend or attack others, actions that could be life-saving and necessary in the right context. Similarly, the emotion of happiness is also a useful one from an evolutionary perspective. It encourages us to proactively do things that are good for us evolutionarily. When we eat a sugar-rich dessert, it can induce moments of happiness because eating in excess when calories were plentiful was a useful survival strategy. It helps us cope in times when food was scarce. Similarly, the happiness we experience when surrounded by loving friends and family is highly advantageous. Humans have always done better when they function in organized groups, and the formation of strong bonds between humans is extremely important to the strength of the group, and therefore evolutionarily advantageous. The second thing to point out is something we're all familiar with, and yet often ignore: that happiness is always fleeting. If we marry the person of our dreams, if we get the house we always wanted, attain that promotion, or otherwise get something that we thought would make us happy, we find that the sense goes away after a while. Walking into the house of our dreams will fill us with joy for a while, until it becomes routine and mundane. This well-recognized phenomenon is called hedonic adaptation, and it demonstrates that the state of happiness isn't a magic realm that opens up for us to walk through, after which we then live there forever. But we can be forgiven for thinking that it is, because our cultural wisdom misleads us constantly on this point. How often are we told about the American dream? The idea that if you work hard enough and achieve financial success, you will live a happy and fulfilling life. Or the notion that upon retirement we will enter our golden years, when we can finally enjoy the fruits of our hard work. Even in popular mythologies, we are deceived about happiness. In movies, the hero saves the day, gets the girl, and rides off into the sunset. In The Lord of the Rings, after his struggles were finally over, Frodo went to the Undying Lands to live amongst the elves in a land of eternal bliss. At the end of every childhood fairy tale is the promise of the hero and the heroine living happily ever after. So even at a young age, we're exposed to this false notion of happiness being a destination we need to orient our lives to try and reach. The bad news is that happiness is not, in fact, a destination we will ever reach. But that is also the good news, because once you fully internalize this fact, it can be liberating. It relieves us of the cultural baggage modernity has force-fed us into believing and allows us to orient our way in the world differently. The happiness question should be replaced with two other questions instead, which are far more useful models for constructing a more fulfilling life. The first is to ask what gives your life meaning and purpose, and the second one is to examine critically why it is that you're unhappy. Let's tackle the notion of meaning and purpose first. It is my belief that the most important question people have to struggle with in today's world is the question of meaning and purpose. As we collectively continue to shed our religions, lose faith in institutions, and even question our societies and cultures, we successfully free ourselves from long-established systems of being in the world. But once we do, we find ourselves adrift, lost in all our newfound freedom, unable to anchor to any kind of guiding force that moves us forward in our lives. It's not at all a coincidence that in the vacuum of meaning and purpose, the opiate-like allure of chasing happiness has stepped into its place. Happiness is easy to understand and communicate through mimetic devices like stories and songs. The pursuit of happiness seems to make perfect sense on an intuitive level, but as in many other instances, our intuitions can lead us astray. Finding meaning and purpose in the modern age requires a lot more work and struggle than it has done in the past. Imagine living your life as a farmer or fisherman in some coastal village over 1,000 years ago. Society and your way of life changed very slowly, if at all. There wasn't a barrage of change and new information that upended your ancient belief systems. You likely had a lifestyle that was practically identical to your grandparents, and that constancy provided a place for you in the world. You knew where you stood. You had confidence in your beliefs, because those beliefs weren't challenged by outside ideas. While I fully recognize the dangers of sticking to dogmatic, unyielding belief systems, it should also be pointed out that such belief systems did provide a real sense of meaning to those who held them. There is comfort in certainty, even if that certainty is misplaced. The challenge of finding meaning and purpose in a constantly changing world was brilliantly elucidated by Nietzsche. Writing during the time of rapidly industrialization of the West in the 1880s, he saw how the advance of science was successfully challenging traditional Judeo-Christian beliefs. Nietzsche himself was very critical of these doctrines, and pointed out that they were unable to provide us with meaning and purpose in the modern world. In this sense, religions had failed us. God, Nietzsche told us, was dead. Nietzsche, however, did not celebrate the death of God. He saw modern society as having lost its sense of purpose and direction, and he believed that the traditional values of religion and morality were no longer relevant or effective in guiding individuals towards a meaningful life. This is a problem that has continued to get worse, a century and a half after Nietzsche's writings. How one finds meaning and purpose in the modern world is the task of every individual in a world where traditions and religions continue to corrode. How one accomplishes this is outside of the scope of this essay. But if there is anything you get out of this, it is that if you find yourself without a sense of meaning, purpose, or direction in life, that foremost is the first thing you need to fix. Unfortunately, modern society doesn't really help you, as our cultural messaging is largely geared towards encouraging transient and superficial pursuits. A walk down an Instagram or TikTok feed will demonstrate that unfortunate reality in abundance. I say this not to discourage you from trying to find direction in your own life, but merely to arm you with the knowledge that this is a difficult and serious task, a journey that many of our ancestors did not need to consider taking, because their environments provided those answers for them, right or wrong as those answers might have been. They did not at least live in the vacuum of purpose that many of us live in today. It could be that you experience unhappiness and a lack of fulfillment in life because you're unable to find meaning in it. It makes sense in such a life that hedonic pursuits like money, fame, sex, leisure, and other distractions are attractive. They at least provide a bit of a dopamine hit, even if it's short-lived. It makes sense that our collective cultural discourse has gradually shifted towards these pursuits. They appeal to the reptilian brain and are easy to connect to. Meaning and purpose in life, however, are far more abstract and often difficult concepts to convey. Let's move on to discuss unhappiness in the context of meaning and purpose. Let's again do a thought experiment and assume that you have discovered a calling, a purpose towards which you wish to orient your life. Let's assume that you've decided that you wish to be a researcher and work on cancer research. You believe that understanding and curing cancer will be a giant leap forward for mankind, and even believe that the science you help develop towards that end will have applications in other things as well. This idea moves you to action. It infuses you with energy, and you then start to organize your life in such a way that this goal is achieved. Let's suppose, however, that you have very little financial or social support. It is very difficult for you to afford college, and in addition to your studies, you also need to take on a part-time job. Imagine further in your first year, you're made to read organic chemistry. You find the subject matter extremely boring and difficult to get through. The challenge of the difficult subject matter, your job, your financial stressors all pile up on you, and you find yourself mostly unhappy a lot of the times. How might you interpret this unhappiness? Let's consider the two ways. The first could be an inclination to listen to prevalent cultural wisdom. You're doing something that makes you unhappy, so why are you doing it? Don't do that. Do something else, something that makes you happy. Your imagination will turn to other possible paths that seem to be more interesting. Maybe you'll become a travel vlogger. Those folks seem to have lots of fun. For one thing, travel vloggers don't have to read organic chemistry, so there's one bright side right there. You imagine a lifestyle of being on the road and sharing your experiences with your audience. This path seems to hold more promise to make you happy, and perhaps you quit college and hit the road. The second option is to dig deep within yourself and confirm that the goal of participating in a cure for cancer is still one that moves you, still speaks to you, still fills you with ambition and drive. If the answer is yes, then you can reframe your current state of unhappiness differently. You can tell yourself that you are currently unhappy because you are going through a difficult time. But being in a difficult place doesn't mean you're in the wrong place. Perhaps difficult places are exactly where you need to be. Perhaps you're in exactly the right place. Nothing, you remind yourself, that is difficult to achieve and worth having comes easy. There is always struggle along the way. The difficulties you are experiencing, with financial struggle and the drudgery of organic chemistry, won't be with you forever. One day you will graduate. One day you'll have mastered material that currently feels daunting. The unhappiness you feel is not a signal that something is wrong, but a signal that you're paying the dues you need to pay in order to get to where you need to be. You remind yourself that this too will pass, and that the purpose you have armed yourself with is worthwhile and worth the difficulties along the way. This is what Viktor Frankl meant when he said, "He who has a why can bear any how." Think about a poor immigrant man running a newspaper stand in a busy and expensive city. He probably didn't dream about selling newspapers when he was younger. But for him, he might connect his job to his ability to raise a family and ensure that his children have a better future than he has had. Perhaps he's able to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get ready for work, because when he does so, he knows he's working to secure a future for his children. And this is his why. This is why he might find happiness in his tiny newspaper stand, because it symbolizes his ability to create a better future for his offspring. There is nothing inherently joyous or happy about being in his booth all day, selling bits of paper to strangers out on the street. For him, meaning is not found in the nature of the work he is doing, but meaning comes from his family. Indeed, community and family serve as perfectly acceptable and satisfying sources of meaning and purpose for many people. In terms of the work he's doing, perhaps the newspaper man really detests his job. Perhaps he's even miserable doing this. But he persists, and does it anyway, because one day it will pay off when one of his children goes to college to study organic chemistry so they can cure cancer. As we navigate the complexities of modern society, it is essential to embark on a journey of self-discovery, to explore our passions, values, and aspirations in order to find our purpose. This purpose may be rooted in our relationships, our careers, our contributions to society, or even a combination of these factors. Ultimately, what matters is that we find a sense of direction that resonates with us and allows us to face life's challenges with resilience and determination. Finding meaning and purpose in life is the key to transcending the transient, superficial pursuits that dominate our contemporary world. It requires us to look inward, to reflect on what truly matters to us, and to commit to a path that aligns with our deepest convictions. By doing so, we can transform our experiences of hardship into opportunities for growth and embrace a life of fulfillment, purpose, and ultimately, happiness.